So in January 2017, I went over to Hilversum in the Netherlands for the Zebia meetup and gave a quick talk on New Year's resolutions and trends, covering AI, IoT, and just taking responsibility for your testing.
Thank you very much. So, I made some notes before I start because, the aim here is we're talking about New Year's resolutions and trends and everything else. I have an issue with New Year's resolutions in that people tend to start stuff and then not keep going. So for me, resolutions are things that we, every single day, we decide, what am I trying to focus on? What are my aims? Why am I doing this thing? And every day reinforce it. Every day. So I have a to-do list that I start. In fact, the to-do list will keep going until I'm, 976. And I'll keep adding to it. Because that's what we do. But what I have to do is I focus on high-level whys that I'm working on. And I think certainly wasn't this year, it was last year. I looked at one of the taglines that I have on my website. In fact, on my website, I have a tagline, that says, I test things and I help people test better. I looked at that and I thought, I'm not sure I'm living up to this. Because I test things, and when I work with people, I help them test better. But who else? I've got some videos on YouTube, I've got some blog posts, and I thought, I'm either going to change this tagline or I'm going to live up to this. So, what I did is I started to really look at the language that I use when I'm talking about testing. So I've always been a big fan that people have to take responsibility of their models of testing, their models of the world of testing. So, because very often what we'll do is, when someone asks us, what is exploratory testing? We will then go, last definition I read was, it's testing as we learn at the same time, and we regurgitate someone else's definition. And then you can find that on the internet. That doesn't mean, that's not us. That's not what we say when we do it. We have to be able to communicate these things in our own words. And I want us to massively take responsibility for everything that I do, every single approach that we do when we automate the systems. It's got so bad with this that I try not to use the word automation. I'm trying to ease that out of my psyche so that I don't say that word because I want to fundamentally take responsibility for what I'm doing to communicate exactly what we're doing. That we're not doing automation, we're automating this specific point in this way with this tool. I want to be very focused on what I'm saying, so I ultimately take responsibility for it with the models that we have. So I try to live up to that. And it's important to understand trends that we monitor what's going on. It's important that we look at what's going on Twitter, that we pay attention to what the buzzwords are, because we're kind of talking about trends. Trends are, in order to be aware of them, we have to monitor. So we hear things like IoT, we hear machine learning coming up. Now this is one of the dangers when we make resolutions, that we get distracted. It's important to monitor stuff, and it's important to have a handle on the signals that are coming through. The IoT is a thing that's over there. But we do that with resolutions. We get attracted to the I will go to the gym. I will start with the gym. I will do the gym until the gym is no longer shiny and I stop. Because it is a thing that comes up. A lot of the time we monitor trends and we get distracted by it. So we see IoT is coming. So we go and look at IoT and we have a learn for IoT, but we're not testing IoT. We're not using IoT in our daily life. So it just becomes a thing that we spend time on that we can't capitalize on. So it's important to monitor. I think it was in cybernetics, there's a notion of strong signals and weak signals. Strong signals are things that come in that you can act on. That weak signals are things that it's important to be aware of, but you might not be able to act on them. But over time, if they accumulate and you notice them enough, then they're something. It's like when you have bugs in your system that kind of keep reappearing in a certain area, in a certain part, and there's some pathology in your development process that's leading to that, and those weak signals are telling you, but it's just that accumulation that you start paying attention to. So part of the reason for monitoring is to work out what are the strong trends and what are not. But what I try to focus on, because we're taking responsibility for our model of testing, is what we're doing now. Because it depends what philosophy of the world you've got. But some philosophies of the world are everything is connected. Right? Everything is linked in some way. And there's so many ways of arriving at a certain point that it kind of doesn't matter which path you take, as long as you keep following and pay attention. So if you focused on the things that you are testing, and you learn those in detail, that will lead you on to something else. And that will lead you on to something else. And chances are it will overlap with one of the trends that you've been monitoring. And then it becomes useful. Like one of the examples for that is probably IoT. Does anyone here test the Internet of Things? Right? Everyone has heard of the Internet of Things. And there are a lot of experts talking about the Internet of Things. And when they talk about the Internet of Things and show you testing of the Internet of Things, they've got a Raspberry Pi. Right? That's a computer. That's not an Internet of Thing. That's a thing, a computer connected to the Internet. And if that's what Internet of Things means, then Internet of Things means testing something using HTTP, possibly with a REST interface. We know how to do that. So we've got a strong signal out there, a trend called IoT, that we could get to if we learn in detail the stuff we're already testing. If we're testing websites and we don't really know HTTP properly, if we learn that in more detail, that will lead on to Internet of Things. Because chances are the Internet of Things devices will need different headers. Chances are the Internet of Things has different risks, right? It has risks in terms of low memory, lower processing power, lower disk space, harder to upgrade. But it's got the same communication protocols, so we can overlap with it if we really deal with the world that we currently have. So one of the things that I'm trying to focus in on is testing better. Testing the things that we already have better. Understanding the technology that underpins that better, and not getting distracted by trends that are coming up that actually I would be able to test if I knew my stuff better. Because one of the other things is machine learning. I was speaking to an expert who was talking about machine learning being impossible to test. Right? It's impossible to test, but they were testing it. So whenever we asked them how they were testing it, what you discover is they test it exactly the same way. Got an input, the machine learning processes it, there's an output. Your difficulties are the massive amount of data that you need. Because when you're generating massive amount of data, how do you know what the expected result is? If you have a lot of data that feed it through the system and compare it with the expected result, your machine may have already learned that, so you're no longer testing. Right? So coming up with new data and knowing what it is one of the problems. But that's a problem that we encounter when we're testing any big system, coming up with lots of data. And we know partly how to deal with that, because you have the system set up into a certain state, then you restore to that state, then you can feed the data through. Now, the difficult with machine learning then is, but you might not get the same results each time. Well, we've got the law of large numbers that says if you do this enough times, then you will get the same thing out. And sometimes we test probabilistically, right? It has to be within these bounds. And it also leads into one of the things that we're possibly not very good at in our existing day-to-day lives of testing is monitoring. Right? We test the system, then we release it live, but we may not monitor it, because we don't know how to monitor it live. When you're doing machine learning, part of your test process is monitoring. Right? Is it still giving me the response that I expect, even after learning all these things? Because if you don't do that, you end up in the same situation that Microsoft did when they put out their chatbot that everyone taught how to be a racist Nazi. Right? Because they didn't monitor it to see whether our nice chatbot has remained a nice chatbot. But monitoring becomes part of it. So that notion, extending it through, and it's all that thinking through the risks that we do as testers. Because a lot of the trends have the same things in it. It's not this massively important or different thing. So, one of my resolutions, how long have I been talking? 10 minutes. Right. So, it's not that I make resolutions, but I set goals and I try and act on them and change them. One of them was, I wanted to create content on a daily basis. Right? So I started using Instagram. But Instagram is a strange place. Is anyone on Instagram? Yeah. So Instagram, you put stuff on Instagram, and then you get likes from sales companies. And everything in sales companies and marketing companies who are liking each other. And it's just this huge, massive ecosystem of sales and marketing companies liking everyone else, and they all think they're doing brilliant. And so what I wanted was to add value, not just with creating content on a daily basis. So then we have to take that content and stick it together and put it on YouTube. So I was using it as a content creation mechanism. But I wanted to do something every day to keep that going, to keep that process going, because that was the only way it was going to work. And every day I would decide, is this still something that I want to do and is still adding value? And it's the same when we're learning. We just take small chunks, we keep pushing it through. What is the next thing I don't know? And keep pushing that part. I've been talking about responsibility for a long time. I think it's massively important that we are responsible for our test processes. Even if you're in an environment that dictates entirely what you have to do, you are still responsible for how you choose to implement that. Because we've all bypassed systems and processes at some point to get something done. Even that little rebellious act of taking responsibility is important. Because that is how you're going to communicate going forward. Learn more about what you already know, because chances are you don't know your technology in depth, and it will lead on to something else. Because I still have massive amounts to learn, even about, I've written a book on Selenium and a book on Java, and courses on this stuff. I still have massive amounts of stuff to learn on this, because it keeps growing. There's constantly more to learn, so I need to keep pushing that. But also trying to communicate this to other people. Right? We were speaking earlier on, you guys are doing some cool things that no one knows about. But people struggle in that area because there's no way of seeing someone doing it well. It's really hard to find examples or case studies of people doing stuff well because we keep that hidden. And the more that we can share, the better off things will be. But one of the most important things is to start offering an alternative. Right? Because very often we tell people, don't do it that way. What we should be doing is, don't do it that way. Here is how you do it. Offer them the alternative. Lead by example in that sense, because you've already taken responsibility for your process. You've owned it. You can explain it in your own words, and you can communicate that out. And the more that people do that, the massively better off we'll be, because there will be more alternative approaches. At the moment, if you're to do exploratory testing, you've got a couple of definitions. You've got a couple of ways of doing it. Because not enough people have put out their approach to doing it. They haven't gone out on a limb and said, this is an alternative, or this is not even an alternative, this is a way of doing it. This is what we did and it worked. That is why events like this are important, why conferences are important, because you're given that alternative based on what you have done. So, I try and do that. But the reason I try and do that is because I started with, why am I trying to do this? Because I test things and I want to help people test better. So that why of doing it leads on to all these other actions, and they keep reinforcing themselves. So whatever you're going to do, figure out what your tagline is, what your why is, take responsibility for that, and then act on it. So that's what, 10 minutes? 15 minutes? Right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.